Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that Washington is concerned over the conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Earlier today, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed lauded his soldiers for victory over the Tigray People's Liberation Front. But the leader of Tigray's forces says the fighting is ongoing, sparking fears of a protracted guerrilla conflict.
Triumphant Abiy Ahmed praised his troops in Ethiopia's parliament on Monday for their victory in the country's northern Tigray region, even as the forces he claims to have defeated said they were still fighting. His soldiers captured Tigray's capital Mekelle at the weekend, prompting a declaration that a military operation in the region was completed.
The defense forces never killed a single person in a single town. No soldier from any country could display a better competence. We have disciplined, heroic soldiers.
Abiy said they'd carried out a special surgery in Mekelle and not destroyed the city, nor killed a single civilian in the region. But in a conflict where information has been difficult to verify, the rebellious Tigrayan People's Liberation Front has a different version of events. It says Mekelle suffered heavy bombardment. It also says the war is far from over and claims to have shot down a plane and retaken a town. In a text message, TPLF leader Debretsion Gebremichael said he was close to Mekelle fighting the, quote, invaders. Abiy's spokeswoman has dismissed suggestions that fighting is still ongoing, saying the many delusions of a disintegrating criminal clique were not their focus. However, Debretsion's defiance raises the spectre of a drawn-out insurgency against a battle-hardened TPLF that, from the days when it toppled Ethiopia's Marxist dictatorship nearly 3 decades ago, has known how to exploit its mountains and borders with Eritrea and Sudan. The violence, in which diplomats believe thousands have died, has also stirred ethnic rivalries. When he took office in 2018, Abiy pledged to unite Ethiopia's 115 million people. But ethnic clashes had killed hundreds and uprooted hundreds of thousands from their homes, even before the latest bloodshed.
Staying with the Ethiopian conflict, a little earlier I spoke to the United Nations World Food Programme Regional Director for East Africa, Michael Dunford, about the refugee crisis that's been created by the fighting in Ethiopia. Dunford is in Sudan to inspect the state of the refugee camp.
We estimate now that there's almost over 45,000 refugees who've entered Sudan from Tigray. And many of them are either still at the border and some now are starting to move into the refugee camps. The situation is very challenging. As you can imagine, it's a brand new refugee influx. We're scrambling to try and get the support to the population that it requires. Thus far, we're managing, but there's a lot of pressure on the humanitarian actors at this stage.
So what is life like for them? What are they struggling with? How are they living?
Sure. So at the moment, the World Food Programme, along with some of the other UN agencies and NGOs, are trying to provide all of the support that they will require. As recently as last week, we were able to move food from other operations that we have in Sudan into the area. We're now in a position where we can feed up to 60,000 people for the first month. So the food is no longer the challenge. The challenge is trying to ensure that they have adequate housing, access to fresh water, and of course, trying to normalize their existence for the period that they are here in Eastern Sudan.
Is the problem escalating? We were reporting 43,000 not so long ago. You're saying it's well over 45 now. So are these refugees still crossing the border from Ethiopia?
Yeah, we are receiving reports that they are still crossing. However, the numbers have slowed, and that's a very positive sign. I think what we'll be telling is the situation in Tigray, now that the federal forces seem to have gained control of Mekelle. If that peace is able to hold, if the fighting that has been occurring starts to decrease, then hopefully the situation will start to settle and potentially even some of these refugees could return.
I would imagine with more than half of the refugees being women and children, there's an extra layer of vulnerability and issues that one needs to deal with.
Sure, absolutely. And we're particularly, as the World Food Programme, particularly concerned about the nutrition status of the children. They're very vulnerable. We are introducing nutrition feeding programs as we speak. We're doing everything that we can to minimize the risk of any outbreaks of illness, which can further exacerbate the situation. And then along with UNICEF and other UN agencies, we're trying to put in the necessary psychosocial care for these populations who are distressed because of what they've seen and because of the circumstances that they're arriving here in Sudan.
We're in the midst of a global pandemic, and I would imagine this is yet another concern you must have. Are there any precautions being taken, testing being taken, any indication that with 45,000 people in a small area that this is something you can manage?
Well, certainly we are very concerned about the risks of COVID. There aren't any reports yet, and hopefully that will remain the case. But we've had to adjust the way that we're doing the distributions to try and minimize the exposure. But, you know, it's a difficult situation. I fear that it's not going to improve quickly in the short term. We just have to come together as an international community and provide the support that is required. The World Food Programme requires $14.8 million to cover our costs for the next 6 months. We're optimistic and hopeful that the international community will step up and provide that type of support.
I mean, things like water, is that, again, something that you have enough of? Because it's not just to drink, though, is it?
No, exactly. And so at the moment, UNHCR and other actors are bringing the water into the location. They've set up water bladders. There is sufficient water at this stage. But at the beginning of every refugee emergency, you know, there are challenges, certainly. And so what's really important now is that we get the right structures in place, we get the foundation necessary, and then we start to ensure that the services provided are done so. Most importantly, we're looking for the situation in Ethiopia to improve, which will allow this population to return. We're hopeful that we don't have a long, protracted refugee situation, but the international community and the World Food Programme are ready to respond if necessary.
This is putting an enormous strain on Sudan. Is Sudan getting enough support? Because I'm sure that this isn't something that they can do alone.
No, absolutely. You know, the Sudanese government and Sudanese people are very generous to allow these refugees to come in, and we appreciate that very much. But certainly this is not, given the current situation in Sudan, the challenges of the economy, we really need international donors to support. And the World Food Programme has already received some support, but it's not sufficient. We're asking for more, and that's why we need this extra $14.8 million for the next 6 months.
So if you don't get enough help quickly enough, how soon might we be having a food crisis?
Well, we're able to borrow from existing programs, so we have the food available. We'll need to cover the costs of that food. We need to be able to also cover the cost of mobilizing and putting the logistics infrastructure in place to guarantee a strong supply chain. There is food available in Sudan that we can buy, but we need the funding to be able to do so. I'm optimistic that the funds and the necessary resources will be made available. The international community has not let us down in the past. We're pleading with them to continue to support the World Food Programme at a time like this.
Typically, who supports WFP in terms of funding these kinds of initiatives to deal with these crises?
So we've had excellent support for an extended period from the likes of the US government, from the European Union, from the UK, Germany, and others. You know, WFP feeds over 100 million people every year at this stage. We've actually seen the numbers and the demand increase because of COVID and because of multiple shocks that have been experienced here in this region. We've had locusts, we've had floods, we've had COVID, and now, of course, we've got yet another refugee operation. So the demands are enormous, but it's very important that we get the funding in a timely manner, and we appreciate greatly the support we've received. Unfortunately, we're having to ask for additional support at this time.
That was Michael Dunford speaking to me a little bit earlier on from Khartoum, having visited the camps where the refugees from Ethiopia are being housed. And he says about 45,000 refugees there at the moment. All right, we're going to leave it there for the time being, and we'll be back at the top of the hour with more for you, but not before the weather.